You're going to find people from all over the country, everyone hungry for money and position. You won't make a name for yourself just doing what the next man does. You'll have to distinguish yourself in some way. You don't have to be this guy, and you don't have to be this guy. You need to be you, uniquely you. You see it all over the media, in movies, on YouTube. There's a bunch of men out there telling you who to be, even women telling you who to be, how to be a man. And right now, masculinity is a confusing term. We don't know what it is. We don't know how to make sense of it. And as men, we're more lost than ever before. We're lost because of the rise of technology, social media, porn, the way schools have handled education for young boys, video games, corporate office work. All of these together have taken away our masculine essence slowly. And so slow, you don't realize it until 15 years later, you're living your life and you have a midlife crisis and you don't understand why. Now, I'm making this video not to tell you who to be, not to tell you the kind of man you should be, to understand masculinity in a nutshell, from utilizing history and to know that there's a new era of masculinity, but it's all up to you to understand what that is. I personally believe masculinity has seasons, and there is no one size fits all. This is why you cannot be just Andrew Tate. There are underlying core aspects of masculinity that come from tradition and history. Now, I love to just share some historical examples of masculinity through the ages that we've been through to help you get a better sense of what a masculine man was back then and how we can use that to make it better for now and the future. And instead of fighting and having all these subcultures of masculinity, you have your MGTOW guys and you have your guys who are like, I don't care, I don't want to even be part of this conversation. But yet, biologically, you are part of the conversation because you're a man, and biologically, you have testosterone and you have a way of being that you do not understand. First, before I jump in, this quick caveat. There is never 100% black, 100% white. Everything in life, there are extremes, and then most people kind of land in the middle. So when it comes to masculinity, you have your extreme masculine men who can be considered toxic. For lack of a better term, we'll call them the toxic guys, the ones who are destroying the world through culture, physically, just from the decisions they make and how they treat people. Then you have your other side of masculinity, that's pretty much guys that just don't want anything to do with anything. They just want to stay in their mom's basement, playing video games, and just completely remove themselves from the world, from society, and from life in general. And some of them, unfortunately, go through deaths of despair, and we don't want to be those guys. But majority of us, you probably watching this right now, if you're a guy, maybe you're a woman with a man or a son, they probably are somewhere in the middle. As I talk through these variety of stages and what masculinity was in history and how it portrays to where we are now and why there's so much confusion, I just wanted to start off with that caveat. All right, so now we jump into what masculinity has been throughout our history. So the simplest version can be what most of us know was our hunter-gatherer ancestors. This was simply the men would go out and hunt for food. They would also hunt for clothing. So when they hunt for animals, they use the entire animal, for instance. At least this is what we know. This is what's in the literature from what we found in terms of fossil records and things like that. And the only reason why we were the protectors, the hunters, was because physically, we just had bigger bodies, we had more strength, and we had a better cardiovascular system than women. That allowed women to go gather the water, gather fruit and berries and vegetables to bring to our camps or commune or whatever we had back then living in the woods and in the jungle, just to make sure that we can live. And they also made sure that our children were raised appropriately and were protected. But again, there were always caveats. I'm pretty sure there were some men that would be with the women because they were probably smaller, a little bit weaker. So they gathered with the women, and I'm pretty sure there were also women who hunted with the men. So there's always caveats. It's rare because those are outliers, but they existed. And I like to use the example of wolves because these were our wild parts of ourselves, the wild humans that still exist in today's society, but we tend to try to ignore because we're trying to be these smart apes. But really, we're still naturally these wild humans that existed back then. Our brains haven't caught up with the development of technology. So I'm using the example of wolves because wolves have a specific hierarchy based on our understanding. Wolf biology is very difficult to understand because different packs have different rules. And most of us believe that the alpha is big, strong, and he's always the one, and everyone respects him. While that's true, every wolf from the alpha, beta, omega has a specific role to play in the pack. And without that role being played, the pack will not survive. But there's always been surprises where there's 2 alpha wolves, one is a male, one is a female of the wolves. And there has been times where the beta wolf would be able to help the alpha with rules. The beta is my personal favorite wolf based on the books that I've read, like this one right here. And the beta wolf would be the one, the uncle, the favorite. He'd be the one to train the pups. He'd be the peacemaker between wolf scuffles, and the only one who could stand up to the alpha if need be. And this has been shown in specific packs. I truly believe that we can learn a lot from wolves because there are no set rules and regulations for every single pack. Every single pack is very, very different. The reason why I bring that up is because, again, we are wild. We try to be something different, and we have, right? We move from this wild part of ourselves into this agricultural culture. And men didn't really move from being the hunters that they were back when we were living in the jungle, but instead we became farmers. And most of the men in the farming age or agricultural age were out there in the field, milling, making sure the fields worked, working 10, 12 hours a day to put food on the table for multiple people, not only their own family, but the family of the communities that were nearby or the kingdoms that exist back then, because agriculture has a long history. And you can learn that if you're interested by reading Sapiens. But during this time, masculinity started to gain value because we had the written word, we were able to write things. Again, agriculture has so much history, there's so much you could get into this. But this is when kings started to come up. We had warriors because there were wars. We also needed our farmers. But for the most part, we started consolidating in cities instead of being these small little tribal people that existed in the jungle. But we started to come into these small locations, but tons of people lived in those locations. And things get a little complicated because, again, we are still human. We are still biologically these animals that exist in us that we have to put to the side because society says this is not right. And that's what started to happen during these times when we had kings and we started to create this specific hierarchy that was very, very strict. This is where a lot of our values come regarding the warrior, of providing and protecting the family. While we have always done that, it really became a value because men went to war. When I think of this, I think of Maximus from the movie Gladiator. He's a true man around that age. And what's great about the movie Gladiator is not only did you see specific good parts, I'm saying good in quotations, of Maximus, you was able to see the evil side of masculinity through Marcus Aurelius' son Commodus. And I want to also point out that during these times, it was agriculture, but men dressed differently. At that time, we wore tunics, we wore cloaks. Sometimes these look like dresses. We had shorter cut hair. As you can see, I have long hair, but hair doesn't really mean much when it comes to masculinity. This is also the time where this video was entirely inspired. During this time, there was a samurai age. Samurais existed from 1185 to 1868. And in the book Musashi, as a samurai, and just reading his story, not only was he a badass samurai that could not be killed and won all of his duels, he was also an artist, a creative. And in that pursuit, he was a painter, a poet, and a writer. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm going to talk more about that in the future. During this time, through this agricultural age, we continued to build cities. We eventually come to the Middle Ages. And this is when we had the emergence of the gentleman in Western society. And this was a model of masculinity and continues to be modeled to this day, depending on who you listen to. So bravery, honor, and loyalty were considered essential characteristics of the gentleman. But the gentleman also had self-control and was considered refined. And as I mentioned, this continues on today. The only issue I have with this when we talk about these values of masculinity, if you read in textbooks and you see the pictures throughout history, is that this is a very European-centric view. Masculinity looks so different depending on the culture and the age. Some countries and some islands, that looks very different. Some are worse. If you think about what's going on in Iran and how masculinity is there, that's a very dark side based on values that I consider masculine. It's like that is going to that extreme that I mentioned, where you have the toxic parts, the evil, the unkind, the ones that don't treat people the same. And I won't go into all the different kinds of masculinity. I'd actually love, if you've made it this far in the video, to comment below from your own history of your family, where you're from, and how masculinity can possibly look different than this Eurocentric view of what masculinity is. I like to use my example. I come from a Latin background. I'm Puerto Rican. It's a small island, but it is Latin culture views. And I hear a consistent thing amongst my fellow brethren is this idea of machismo. For those that don't know, machismo, some parts of machismo may be good. Like if you look at responsibility, if you look at the responsibility to provide and protect your family, be a defender of the family, these things are great. But there's also a dark side, which comes out more often than the good side. This dark side can show up in the ways of jealousy, dominance, aggression. It's why, at least in my circle of friends that I grew up with, a lot of their men had a problem, a drinking problem, and alcohol was a huge thing in their family because of the stress of this machismo, and having to be that specific way was probably too much for our ancestors, our fathers and grandfathers. But again, I would love to hear your own stories of this. If you're also Spanish origin, Latin, whatever you want to call it nowadays, but I still call it Latin, please comment below. I'd love to hear your own story and share it with others who are watching this video. So I want to move real quick to the masculinity of the industrial age. And this is more recent. This is where I consider we started to formulate this capitalist gentleman, where men were expected to produce, to be productive, and work on becoming successful. This is where the idea of careers came about. And it was when we first started this idea of it's cool to show off your house, it's cool to show off your car, your new refrigerator, all that BS. And this continues to today, this consumerist attitude of like, I need the bigger and better car, house, wife, whatever that is. And this is also around the time where we considered the value of being a good father and a good husband came to be. And that's great and all, but what does that, how can you prove that? You watch shows like Mad Men, where it didn't really showcase that well with Don Draper and the things he went through. He had a very successful external life, but internally, there was so much turmoil. Think of that. Now these values continue to exist today. And when you look at today, we are currently in the digital age. With the rise of feminism, which I'm not saying it's a horrible thing. I think it did amazing things for women, and it allowed us to be where we are today, where women are killing it and they continue to do better and better every year. And with the rise, this started to shift that idea of a masculine man being stoic and serious all the time, not able to showcase his emotions, to the soft side of masculine, or the true masculine who can be vulnerable in times that are necessary. He can showcase his emotions in a healthy way. And this new values, or values that have existed but we didn't showcase because it was considered wrong or it was considered not manly, but empathy and emotional intelligence started to become a very important value. But again, nothing is perfect. There are always outliers. Some of us may not agree with these values. These are just values that are kind of the undercurrent of what a masculine man can be, based on what we've created through the ages, or what we feel internally on what a masculine man should be. Now we have the history of what masculinity has gone through regarding all these ages. Yes, it's very summarized. There's a lot that goes into it. I've provided a ton of resources of videos and articles that I watched below and studies that I read. But for the most part, I try to like pack it in so that you have a great understanding of what it looked like throughout the ages. And this is all the physical archetypes as well as the softer side of the archetypes of men through these ages. But now comes the most important question of all. With this information and your own experience, what does masculinity mean to you? For me, it's an integration. It's an integration of a variety of archetypes like the warrior, and you can read this specific archetype in books like Iron John by Robert Bly. It's also the book that allowed me to become comfortable with growing my hair and knowing that it's not wrong. It's the one that allowed me to be comfortable with allowing my shaggy beard to grow and be totally fine with it. Because society was the one who was like, you need to be this shaven, clear-cut individual. But when you're that way, do you feel like you are in your own body? But also, there's that side of it. But I also still believe that my cat just jumped on me. Hi, Lily. Also that integration of the warrior, but also the gentleman. If you read the Stoics, Stoicism is good if used correctly. And also like reading articles from the Art of Manliness website. And for my life in general, I do follow the code of Musashi and his path. In my own life, I follow a code like Musashi. Now, with some caveats, Musashi decided to go the path of the lone warrior. I don't think the lone warrior is something that we should aspire to. Men need men. Iron sharpens iron. We need male friendships. We need our fathers. We need uncles. We need mentors that are men. If you go see a therapist, I recommend going to see a man. I'm not saying a woman is wrong. I just think you need someone who's going through a similar experience as you. And I think that men need to be more communal. There's no such thing as the lone warrior. You sitting there watching this video, if this is something that you do all day, you need to go out and find men. And at the same time, the reason why Musashi, the book, really inspired me was because not only was he a dangerous and powerful warrior, he was an artist. He was a creative. He had this softer side. I love the idea of being this artist and creative who can go outside and breathe the air and smells of nature and who can listen to the birds chirping. Love to sit on the beach and just listen to the waves crash amongst the rocks. This is the sides that let me connect and be closer to God. And the values that truly matter to me are those of the protector, the provider, the creator, the artist, the courageous one, the one who has discipline, self-control, one who creates a space of ease for those that he loves. He's respectful, empathetic, vulnerable. He has immense emotional intelligence. He's adaptable. He knows when it's time to be hard, to be that strong, stoic warrior, but also can ease in to the beauty of the lover, to be kind and soft and loving to those that he loves. And the best way to put it is one that can be in the fire, who can be the fire, but also can tone it down and become the cool embers. But the fire is always there and can be turned on at any minute. And these are just some of the values I hold to high standards for myself, but also the men in my life. But also respecting that the men in my life have other values. And just understanding like, hey, it's totally fine. Your idea of masculinity, my idea of masculinity may be different. And I've had many men throughout my life come and go, from my teen to even now. And most of these men came to me through the internet, through books, and also through my own meditations and my own solo journeys. And again, to speak to God, to be closer to God and have an understanding from deep within, which I know comes from my own upbringing, my own specific circumstances that led me to understand what a man is. I had to figure it out on my own because I didn't have that growing up. It's a hard journey. It's grueling. And this is why you can't do it alone. And I think that your essence of masculinity will shift as you age, as certain circumstances and situations happen in your life. Right now, for instance, I'm in the season of my sage or my magician, the creator, the artist, the one who's creating more to support young men. And I know that my warrior will come back. My warrior season ended about 2 years ago. And then maybe a time where I need to delve into my lover aspect and be with my kids and my partner and to be able to showcase that. For more information on the archetypes that I just mentioned, like king, warrior, magician, lover, there's a great book. I did a podcast on that you can watch here. Read the book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Come back here. Comment below your own journey, your own story as to where you are and where you want to be. And I want to close with this quote from Musashi. He saw the white paper as the great universe of non-existence. A single stroke would give rise to existence within it. He could invoke rain or wind at will, but whatever he drew, his heart would remain in the painting forever. If his heart was tainted, the picture would be tainted. If his heart was listless, so would the picture be. If he attempted to make a show of his craftsmanship, it could not be concealed. Men's bodies fade away, but ink lives on. The image of his heart would continue to breathe after he himself was gone.